Welcome back to Story Chaser, the podcast that uncovers the voices and perspectives we don't always hear. I'm your host, Tara Ruff. There's a phrase you've probably heard by now, the male loneliness epidemic. I've been sitting with that phrase for years, and the numbers are hard to ignore. A lot of young men are lonely, not just having a rough year lonely, but disconnected from friendships, from intimacy, from any real sense that they're wanted or understood. More men say they have no close friends than ever before. More men are reaching adulthood without ever having sex or dated. And suicide rates among young men keep climbing. That alone should shock us. But loneliness doesn't sit quietly. When people go looking for answers, especially online, they don't always find comfort. Sometimes they find ideology, a story that explains their pain, names a villain, and promises belonging. That's where we find the manosphere, a loose network of forums and content that ranges from self-improvement advice to pick-up artist tactics to, at the far end, something much darker. In this realm is where we find incels, involuntarily celibate men and women, most often defined by men who've built an identity around the belief that they're doomed, genetically, socially, unjustly, to be rejected by women. Some of these spaces are hopeful, some are sad, and some are undeniably dangerous. What complicates this even further is something that's talked about far less. Autistic men are significantly overrepresented in these communities, not because autism causes hatred, it doesn't, but because it can make social connection harder and vulnerability online is easy to exploit. Most of the men in these spaces will never hurt anyone, but many are hurting, deeply, quietly, behind screens that slowly convince them that the only people who understand them are others just as lost. So how do we talk about this? How do we hold space for real pain while still pushing back on beliefs that dehumanize women and trap men in hopelessness? How do we listen without endorsing? How do we engage without turning away? Today I'm talking to someone living inside that tension. He's 27 years old. He's in therapy. He describes himself as a feminist, and he's spent years in and around incel-exit and incel-reform communities. Spaces meant to talk honestly about loneliness while actively trying to avoid the more dangerous rhetoric. He's not a spokesperson. He's not a redemption story. And he's not here to defend an ideology. He's just someone still figuring things out. He agreed to speak to me on the condition of anonymity. The name you'll hear isn't his real one, but the conversation is. This isn't an intervention, and it's not a takedown. It's a conversation with someone society is constantly talking about, but rarely actually talking to. So Q, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hey, you're welcome. So, just something I wanted to say outright before. I do not see myself as an incel. I meet the technical definition of someone who would, like to have sex but hasn't had an opportunity to and has been like actively pursuing that without success. But I do not identify with the incel culture. I do not go to incel forums. I am a feminist. I don't believe in what they believe.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad, Q, you started the conversation up with that because, again, like what this interview and what this conversation is trying to achieve is the wider span of what the male loneliness epidemic is and how some people get lost in that and find incel ideology. And
Yeah.
it's one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you because you're actively trying to help yourself, right? And that's kind of, I want to start the conversation up top more so about you. Just a
Mhm.
little bit about yourself, as much as you feel comfortable, where you're from, how you grew up, your family, as much as you're willing to share. We'd love to hear.
Well, I'm from North Carolina. I grew up pretty not I did get very lucky in a lot of ways because I have a well-off family. I have parents who are great and not perfect, but they put up with a lot of stuff that they didn't have to. And they helped me a lot, both emotionally, however they could, and financially. So because of them, I have access to a good therapist, and I do think that just me be having access to all these resources because of my parents' money makes it easier for me than a lot of other people.
I understand that. And
Yeah.
when you say they had to put up with a lot from you, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm autistic and it can be difficult. And I don't always get along with them, even though I care about them a lot.
That's very
And
understandable.
my dad is he would tell you he doesn't have autism. I am 100% sure he does. And two autistic people don't always get along that well. So there's definitely tension there. But he still always has my back when I need it. So, yeah.
No, totally. And I think that's a very important point because autism in its whole, it struggles with social cues, right? Like that is one
Yeah.
of the identifiers. And I think it's something that's very interesting and facet to your lived experience,
Mhm.
especially, growing up. So let me dig a bit deeper there. So tell me about how high school was for you.
So high school was bad, at least for the most part. Part of it was that I was going to this private school that was supposed to help me with my disabilities, but it did not. It was incredibly clicky. Most of the people there had disabilities like ADHD, but there were very few autistic people.
Hmm.
And the autistic people were almost always bullied pretty badly. And it was incredibly small, so everyone knew everyone. It was clicky. People would talk about each other too much. And it was just hard to relate to people there, and especially to make social connections, especially as over time I started getting like I got into fights. I stopped interacting with people. I ate lunch in a separate room from everyone. I spent recess on my phone in a room hiding out without telling anyone. I stopped doing track because of the bullying because I just couldn't stand my teammates. I stopped going to clubs and that type of thing. And thankfully, I got out of there before senior year and went to a much went to a middle college, or early college or whatever,
Right.
and did that for my senior year, which was a much better environment.
Now, your high school experience, that must have been very hard for you.
Yes.
So, when you transitioned to the middle college, how did things change? Was there a sense of self you had become where you felt more emboldened to challenge any people fighting back or bullying, or was it a completely different experience entirely?
Well, part of it was that it was more other misfits, and it was also a public school, so people weren't like realistically, everyone at my old school was wealthy.
Yeah,
It wasn't that way at the middle college. People were more accepting generally. And
right.
there was also it was more of a college style, more free time between classes, no like activities, no forced fun activities outside
Yeah,
of classes
yeah.
that created, yeah. You didn't have to socialize if you didn't want to.
Right, right. Is that where you first started to, find people who accepted you and make friendships, or did that take some time?
Well, I'd always had friends, and the middle college was kind of odd because it was kind of when I stopped having like close friends and started having people I like to hang out with. Like when I was in high school, none of my close friends were in my school, but I still had close friends that I would see regularly through
Right,
other stuff I was doing.
right.
And of course, that started drying up in my senior year because, like, I used to be a Boy Scout, and that's how I met most of my close friends. And that ended, and I stopped going to birthday parties and planning my own stuff, and no one ever asked me to do stuff with them. And I was
Right.
okay with that for the most part. But I didn't realize at the time, but it was probably stunting my social growth. And I think looking back on it, I wish I had done more to get outside of my comfort zone. But I think I was just so relieved to not be in a toxic situation.
Absolutely. I mean, growing up around that too, I think your body's always in a sort of fight or flight mode, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to ever feel safe. So fast forward to today. What do you do now? What fills your days and what are you up to?
Well, currently, what I want to be doing is be a park ranger, but that's a competitive and difficult job to get into. I have a biology degree from uh, UNC Asheville, so I did some jobs. Right now, I'm working as a security guard, but that's very new. Like, I haven't even had my first shift as a guard yet, so I
Right.
just started.
Wow.
Like,
That's
my first
exciting.
shift's tonight.
That's very exciting. That sounds
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, you're
But no,
getting that
I'm
way.
happy to hear a bit about your past, and I wanted to start with that up top just because obviously what we're talking about today is a phrase that's dominating headlines, right? The
Yeah.
male loneliness epidemic is I mean everywhere right now. And these statistics about young men feeling more isolated than ever is very jarring. Does that resonate with your experience growing up or currently at all?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And it makes a lot of sense, really.
What
Um,
makes sense about it?
well, a couple things. First of all, I think that there's more like awareness of mental health, and like men especially were taught like, oh, you can't feel X, Y, and Z. And like we're finally getting to the point where people can talk about that type of thing. I don't know if the male loneliness epidemic is actually that new. And the other thing is that we're kind of we've almost created this society both in a friendship, but especially like from a dating perspective that sort of disencourages being close to people. It feels like the way dating works and the way everything works, it's all about like not about getting to know people personally one on one. It's about the plan, the game, the long term goals, which I know isn't how it works, but it's how it seems like it works. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm. And say more about that, and I'm glad you brought that up. What has dating looked like for you? What has your dating history looked like, and what has that experience been?
I had a girlfriend in high school. We met through an autism support group, and it was kind of like she was just the default. She was the prettiest girl in that support group. I was the best looking guy in that support group. So, and our parents were friends. So, default.
Say more. What do you mean about default? Like, it was the easiest thing to do at the time?
Yeah. Yeah. It was like I didn't really like her that much. And I don't know how much she liked me. I think she liked me more than I liked her, but it was just
Mhm.
like I could date her without any effort.
Mhm.
I didn't
Mhm.
need to extend effort. And I kind of realized that and broke up with her once I realized that I was way more attracted to other people than her.
Okay. So talk to me then
And
about the other
yeah.
people you've been attracted to.
Well, I remember the day after I broke up with her, I was going to ask this other girl in my class out, and she said she had a boyfriend. But I didn't even get a chance to ask her out. It just came up in casual conversation.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So as of currently then, how is it all going since the first relationship? Have you had a good amount more dates and luck, or what has that been?
I've had a couple dates. No real relationships. I've kissed a couple other girls, but that's about as far as it's gone.
Okay. And when things don't work out, what do you think is happening? What's your theory on why it doesn't work out?
It can happen a couple different. Sometimes I'll say something and put my foot in my mouth. Sometimes I will just, I think, not be interesting enough. And I don't really know how to, do a date, how to flirt properly, how to
Mhm.
like tell the difference. And it's part of why I'm so active on some of these communities is I'm trying to like figure it out.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that makes sense. When you think of an ideal relationship, then in that context, an ideal partner, an ideal woman, what does that person look like to you?
Someone who's, for me, it's a lot like, let me think. I don't really know. Um, I think I pretty broad standards. Someone who's shares a lot of interest with me and has like a similar I think one big thing is like compassion and someone who's willing to like work with me rather than just try and like say, okay, you need to be this, this, and this. And if you're not, I
Mhm.
break up with you.
Mhm. And have you
Yeah.
found that in the past with the dates you've gone on that the people maybe don't meet you where you're
Yeah.
at?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it'll be like one small thing and they don't even like bother to explain it to me. They just, yeah.
And does that frustrate you? Is it hard?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah. What do you think is the hardest part? Is it that gap in between you don't feel like the people you're dating or are reaching out to understand you?
Yeah. Yeah, to an extent. But also it's like there's this like catastrophizing that goes on in my head. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Say what you mean. What does that mean?
well, like I'll think like, okay, what's the worst case scenario for what could have caused them to not be interested in me? And then my brain sort of decides that's what happened. Yeah.
Q, I think you said something up top that I want to loop back around with because it's how I reached out to you, right?
Yeah.
So communities online, right? You're
Yeah.
active in the groups that I found are
Mhm.
incel-exit, incel-reform forums. What drew you to these specific spaces out of all the different types of support groups? I guess what felt safe about these spaces specific?
Reddit Reddit in general, and honestly, I don't like incel-exit that much. Um, honestly, I found, some better but Reddit in general is anonymous, and that's what I think makes it so good for that. Obviously, Reddit has a lot of problems. It can be pretty toxic. Also, I think because of the same anonymity, but it's the anonymity of it that I think allows me to open up about this.
And have you found those spaces to be helpful to speak with other men, even women who might feel the same way as you or have advice?
It's a mixed bag because sometimes you'll see something really discouraging and you'll hyper focus on that.
Tell me more what
Sometimes,
you mean about discouraging.
well, like, for example, you can find a lot of Reddit threads where people talk about where like women will say stuff about why they would never date a virgin. Or you can find a lot of Reddit threads where, of course, you can find a lot of Reddit threads people saying the opposite, but yeah, you can see a lot of Reddit threads just sort of dooming, saying that like there's very little hope for people who, are autistic or that it's autism and stuff like that.
And those comments when it comes to virginity, when
Yeah.
people point out that they would never date someone who's a virgin, does that bother you?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Tell me
does.
why.
Well, it's a rejection, even if it's not intentional or directed toward me specifically.
And have these groups helped you feel less alone when it does come to battling your feelings? Have you found like minded individuals who've helped you grow and kind of understand that, things can get better?
Sometimes not it's difficult because like one of the things that'll happen is someone will say, "Oh, this helped improve it," and then but like their circumstances are slightly different, so my brain goes, "No, this won't work for me because they're different." Or yeah,
No, no, that's really helpful to understand. And I think
yeah,
I want to touch on something because you mentioned it as well, right? Reddit can be a place where dangerous ideals and sentiments live. There are different types of communities, some more
yeah,
supportive, some more angry, right? Some
yeah.
where loneliness turns a little bit darker, and those communities are built around resentment rather than redemption.
Mhm.
So I want to ask you a question. I want you to be honest with me. Have you participated in language of resentment or anger yourself?
Yeah, yeah, sometimes if I'm feeling really upset, I remember one time I posted on someone's who was rejected saying women hate autistic people in general, and that was probably, in hindsight, not super smart, just a sort of knee-jerk angry reaction, and that type of thing. I usually try not to go too far or delete it later if I realize that it didn't make any sense. I do think that there is some level of ableism in dating for sure, but it's just the same level of ableism that's everywhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
I understand that. And when it comes to those moments when you're feeling that anger, right? When you do post something like that, take me to that moment. Is it because you've faced it, you've experienced so much of that pain yourself that you're fed up? Is it because you think it can change a narrative? Where does it come from when you get that anger and post something like that?
Well, the alternative is that sometimes it feels like the alternative is, oh, well, it's my own fault. My own fault for not doing this in college and not doing this in high school or whatever.
Right.
And it's like sometimes it feels like there are two options: be angry at myself or be angry at others, and I'll vacillate between the two sometimes.
And something you mentioned, right? You are in therapy. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a really good first step. How do those conversations go when you're working through these emotions, right? That are fueled a lot by pain?
Well, one thing that is good is that my therapist isn't shutting down my ideas or shutting we go over them logically, we go over them rationally, and we talk about what's going on realistically. And we come up with actual plans and ideas and yeah,
I think that's great. Logic really helps to ground us,
yeah.
right, back in reality. When it does come to these, because I'm sure you've come across other folks who are angry too, but that
Mhm.
anger maybe has turned into something a bit darker. What do you think that men in similar situations who turn bitter and who turn angry and direct that anger at women, why do you think that some men do that and some don't?
Part of it I do think is what sort of things they have access to. It is very easy to start getting angry at the people rejecting you all the time. I've definitely gotten angry, I just, calmed it down. And when you don't have a therapist you can talk to, when you don't have someone who understands what you can talk to, it's difficult to do that, especially when a lot of the people who, like, at this point, the idea that, like, oh, you're this old, you can't have sex, and you're upset about that, you must be an incel. And there's, a lot, like, you can be upset about that without blaming women for that. So there's like, I remember one person I talked to said, "So what? Like, X% of women get raped all the time." And it's like, that's not relevant to my problem. But
Talk more
when you
about that. What do you
like,
mean?
it was actually a conversation with my mom when I talked to her about how upset I was about not having sex at this age. And she said, well, like, she said, "So what? Two-thirds of women get raped." And that just really upset me because it's not relevant and
That's
it's
interesting too.
terrible.
I understand that this perspective, and I'm interested. When you say it's not relevant, and I think that that's a hard line, right? When you have
Yeah.
a problem where you're not seeing it any solution, and on the vice versa, there's a equally as urgent, right, epidemic of women not feeling safe. How
Yeah.
do you balance those two things, right? With acknowledging there's reasons why women have, the reservations they have, but also your own feelings, that must be difficult to do.
Yeah. Well, it's like I understand why it's a problem, of course, and why women would feel unsafe. There are a couple things that I think people don't realize. A, I don't think that it's incels for the most part that are making women feel unsafe. I do know that there are some incels that are dangerous, but like the vast majority of them probably wouldn't even be socially like brave enough to go outside and stalk a woman, much less actually attack her or anything. The vast majority of like violence and sexual violence and domestic violence is from people who already know the victim and are already in relationships with the victim.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. It's an interesting, I guess my follow-up there then is when you're in these spaces, right?
Yeah.
These Reddit forums, these threads, do you think that they're further reinforcing sometimes a pattern that might be dangerous for you? Or do you think they're helping you make your way out?
It can be both. It's really tough sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just want to like talk about it. I've found some better communities.
And they're less dangerous, I suppose. They're less folks, I guess I think
Yeah,
the harm that comes in some of these communities is when everyone feels very down in the same way. Where are the solutions, right? Like, where is there a way forward that is very conducive to how you believe and think, right?
yeah.
And I think I want to re-ask you a question. You mentioned this up top, but I want to make sure you have a moment to talk more about this. You've said the word incel has become a catch-all for any creepy or sexually frustrated men, right? You're saying that
Yeah.
most incels aren't the ones out there stalking women, but the ideology is dangerous,
Oh,
right? And
yeah, for sure.
I think that that's something, you do not identify as an incel, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So what word would you use for yourself? Not a word, but what do you believe you are then? What is the mindset where you feel this way that can be dangerous, but you're actively working a way out? How do those two things, being a feminist, but also maybe holding ideals towards women that could be dangerous, right? That could be almost shifting a blame onto them. How do you hold those two titles at the same time?
Well, it's not really a title though, because it's like everyone has prejudices. Everyone has dark thoughts. Everyone thinks about doing things that they would never do. And it's like, for me, what it is it's just like, all right, I know what the right thing is. And even if I have these thoughts, I'm not going to act on that. I'm going to calm down. And when I calm down, I'm going to think it over. And sometimes when I'm on the internet, I'll say something that I regret and then I'll delete it because I realized, oh crap, that's stupid. And I don't think I've ever gone into like the full incel, I hate all women type thing. But
Do you think there's
yeah,
some days where it's hard for you not to feel that way though?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's gotten better recently than it has been in the past.
What's helped you achieve growth in that way?
Um, Talking to more people, doing more stuff. I've started like trying to talk with friends outside of my hobbies. I've reconnected with a couple of my old friends, and yeah,
No, that's good. And I think that so much of what these studies are showing too, when it comes to the
yeah,
overarching loneliness epidemic that men are facing right now, is that
hmm,
social isolation is really hard, right?
yeah,
And having friends around you who understand you, but also that you can speak to in an emotional capacity means everything. And I think you mentioned this as well, where yes, a lot of men feel, and society paints it in a lens that there's only one emotion men can comfortably express, and that's anger. Do you
yeah.
feel that way? Is that something that you've
Oh
battled?
yeah, yeah. That's why I got in fights back in high school rather than talked about my problems.
And have you found male friendships at this stage in your life that you feel like you can talk about your problems with them?
Yeah, yeah. Female friends I can talk to about that problem.
Yes.
I
Yes.
actually recently reached out to one of the failed date girls I went on a date with, and that didn't work out, and we've been hanging out as friends.
And how did that go? How are conversations like that after the fact?
It's going well because like we just had a lot in common and really enjoyed each other, but she just she was bisexual and trying to figure things out, and she said that she just wasn't really into men. Actually, a couple months after since we last talked, where I'm like, oh, I still have her number in my phone. I'll just send her a text, and we've hung out a bit.
Right. And when you mentioned too that you're feeling less angry these days and that things are helping, is it kind of a do you see the solution being friendship and being putting yourself out there? What do you think is actually directly helping?
I think friendship, putting myself out there, talking to people who aren't going to judge me for it, who are good people, and yeah, that is very helpful.
Yeah,
Having hobbies, um, I play D&D, I run, I do bushcraft stuff.
that's
Yeah,
awesome. I tried to get into D&D, but I couldn't find an
yeah,
online community to do it in, so I need to be more on it. Um, but no, that's really great. I want to touch back on something cute that you've mentioned, and I think as an overarching driver of a lot of the things that you consider have gone wrong, right? So
mhm.
being autistic. How
Mhm.
much do you think that explains what you're going through versus other
A
factors?
lot.
Talk to me about that.
Well, being autistic, first of all, you just don't necessarily get a lot of social cues. And especially on a first date, a lot of women are going to, especially on dating apps, are going to judge you a lot based on your first impressions without really getting to know you.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense on dating apps, and the statistics back this up. Women have a lot of matches. So when you have that many options, you can afford to be a bit judgy on the first date.
Mhm.
And it's not like I think women are just inherently more judgmental. I feel like I'd be that way if I had that many matches. It's just like, I make a faux pas. I look at someone in a creepy way, don't make eye contact enough, say something kind of weird out of context or just off the cuff, and or just have a day where I'm not feeling that social. And then they don't really bother beyond that.
I think it's a good point you raise because social cues, especially with, and I know you understand this as well,
Yeah.
is, the historical lens of what women, see men as. If a
Yeah.
man comes off as a little bit unsafe to them, they immediately, retreat, which is an
Yeah.
understandable history backed thing. And
Yeah.
then turn to the side of it's harder for somebody who cannot always show the social cues that are societally deemed normal, right?
Yeah.
And in those situations, when you do face these sorts of problems, is there a woman who's straight up told you, I do not date men who are autistic? Or is that something
No.
you've learned?
No.
So
I
how have you
have
come
been ghosted by women who I told them I was autistic and I never heard from them again.
Mhm, mhm. So after a while, that becomes a acceptance of, okay, so that's the reason why.
Yeah, and there are other things. I think part of it is that there's this sort of like media idea of what autistic people are, and I do not fit that.
Okay.
I am not like the sort of Sheldon Cooper hyper genius who's socially awkward, or like The Good Doctor, which I hate that show so much. Uh, and then there's the like TikTok autism, which is like all quirky, ooh woo type stuff.
Right,
And
right.
I'm not in that either. So,
No, it's the perceptions that media puts on certain
yeah,
types of
people.
labels,
Yeah,
right? People label, right? So, and I
yeah,
think that's something that you and I talked about in our very initial meeting.
yeah,
Was a Reddit post that you had flagged about how the media and how film, television portrays virgins,
yeah,
and how in that way is they're losers and people take pity on them. And so, to talk to me about that, is that something growing up you noticed immediately, and it
yeah,
kind of set in you?
yeah, yeah. Especially as I started getting like to the age where, being a virgin was like people started to lose it. Like, especially once I turned like 18, that really started to mess with me.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you see as the solution forward when you're battling, right? Many different trains of thought. You are acknowledging the fact that this is not a woman's fault that you aren't,
Yeah.
dating or having sex, but you're also frustrated because you're battling very real life things like autism, like having
Mhm,
dealing with a general society that deems men who haven't had sex a certain way.
mhm.
How do you balance all of these things at the same time and stay positive and stay moving forward?
Well, I don't know if I always stay positive. I'm in a good mood today, so, but one thing that I have realized is that people, if the only thing they know about you is that you're a virgin, then they're going to have a negative view of you. But if they know a lot of positive things about you before they figure that out, it's not going to move the needle that much.
Mhm. And do you
Yeah.
think that's your perception? Do you think that you're assuming people don't wanna talk to you or be with you if you're a virgin, or how do you come to that?
I think that that is a sort of like universally negative thing. And that if that was the only thing they knew about me, but I
And
don't
why do you
advertise it. I don't tell people very much unless, like, I'm close to them.
Right, right. And why do you think that? Is it because of responses you've gotten even from male friends?
No, it's just how I imagine it would go.
Interesting that you say imagine, right? Because
Yeah,
maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's
maybe,
it's it's
but
about being more open and
yeah,
putting that sentiment out of your head. I think that it's very easy for us sometimes to make excuses for reasons why, not excuses, but justifications, and I
yeah.
think um it's a very difficult path to navigate, and it's why these platforms like Reddit are easy. And I
Mm.
think, has it been a place for you where you've been able to make friendships with people who've helped that growth mindset and that sentiment kind of stray away from, the anger or resentment that sometimes you feel?
A little, not so much on the, like, incel adjacent forums, but, like, or the, like, help forums, but on, like, other forums, like positive stuff.
So, no, take me back then, because you mentioned something that I wanna touch on a bit more. In these forums, the incel
Yeah,
adjacent ones, because you're not
yeah,
in an incel Reddit, you're in an
yeah,
incel-exit Reddit, an
yeah,
incel-reform Reddit.
yeah.
One, what drew you to those specific communities? Was it Talk to me a bit about why something that is even incel adjacent if you adamantly believe you are not?
With incel-exit, the reason I made that post is because I was really frustrated with some of the advice I was seeing there, because it felt like they were more interested in arguing with people than helping them,
Okay. Talk to me a
and,
bit about that. Like, what was it that you posted that you felt was being put down?
um, people people were saying, like, "Don't let other people define your self-worth," without really acknowledging how hard that is, and they were, like, putting all the entirety of the blame on the people who are asking for help, and it felt more like an attack than anything else, and I just felt like I wanted to point out that that's not how that works. You don't just go from if everyone is telling you that you're a certain way, you respond with some sort of anger, or I'm having trouble describing it, but yeah,
No, I understand, and I think that that's kind of a train of thought that's been emphasized in this conversation is anger is a big factor in how you respond to when these things happen, which again, when we go back to the society conversation and how men are perceived to only have that one emotion to
yeah.
share, it's a hard thing to battle. And I guess my follow-up there is why continue on in these pages if they only make you feel worse?
Part of it, I think, is that I want to have, like, my ideas part of it, I think, is that I do get a bit addicted to, like, arguing online sometimes. Part of it is that there is actually genuinely helpful advice in there.
Okay.
It's just not always the most easy thing to find. And part of it, I think, is, that I do like giving other people advice sometimes because, like, I don't know, I've gone on more dates than probably most people in my position have.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I probably more stable than a lot of people in my position emotionally. So I feel like I can give some advice to those people, even if I can't fix everything.
Right, right. Do you see then in these communities the folks who are too far gone? And is it something that, one, you don't identify with? Like, you don't identify as an incel, you
Yeah.
identify as a feminist.
Yeah.
But then, right, you can note certain takes that you have that may not seem very feminist or that may seem like it inches a little further into what incel ideology is. So when it comes to seeing those posts from folks that maybe validate the way you feel, how do you navigate that? And are you being, I guess, is it a conscious reminder that that's not you and you're not trying to fall deeper into that angry, resentful kind of ideology that incels kind of bandwidth.
Well, the thing is, I can like acknowledge that, like, well, some things incels say might be right. Partially, the idea
Like
that
what?
the idea that women have an easier time finding dates usually. That doesn't mean that it's like easy mode like they think. There are all sorts of other problems that come with that. Like the analogy I like to think is women are drowning, men are dying of thirst.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's an interesting saying. It's an interesting
Yeah.
saying because it kind of puts the blame on women in a way, does it not?
Well,
That we have
not
a plethora of options, and so it's easy for us.
well, not really. Like I said, it's like for me at least, it's like women are getting there's these I think I do think the real problem is like I don't think it's anyone's really fault. It, at least the drowning analogy, I feel like
Mhm.
it's more like just the way things pan out tend to I I'm trying to sometimes I can't come up with
Mhm.
the words to explain how I'm feeling, but
No, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. And that's the
yeah,
purpose of this conversation, Q,
yeah,
right? I think that what I said in that intro, society is constantly talking about males who are lonely or
yeah,
battling but we're not ever talking to them. And that's why
yeah,
it's so important and why I want you to be able to talk about this because
yeah.
you have a perspective that many men in this world and not just this country but world are feeling right now.
Mhm.
What does a perfect world look like for you? Not even a perfect, but a world where you feel happier, a world where you feel less lonely. What does that look like?
Well, I don't of course, nostalgia isn't good, and I don't wanna say the past was better, but, like, just something I think of, on my parents' first date together, my dad took her back to his apartment and fed a goldfish to his fish in front of her, a live goldfish.
Okay.
And it's like, today, that'd be like red flag central. She'd never talk to him again.
Why do you
But
think
she
that?
did. And she was disgusted by it, but she did because she thought maybe it's just a first impression thing. And it was. And they got married and had me. So,
Right.
yeah.
Q, it's interesting. Something I know in how you speak about yourself and about situations is it's an assumption that people will immediately be turned off or disgusted or,
Yeah.
you know, othering something that you do. And I wonder, like, when you do go on these dates and put yourself out there, I feel like, is that something that's learned? Like you've found it to be true that the things that you do or say are immediately, you know, othered by women?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I remember just recently I had a great date with someone and then she said she didn't want to go on another date with me because I didn't offer to pay for the coffee.
Okay. Okay.
Or another one who because I didn't offer to give her a ride when we were talking about going somewhere else.
Okay. And how do you hold that? Do you I guess the question is more of a blanket statement when it comes to the perception of women. Because why
Mhm.
I keep coming back to this is I think resentment is such a fine line
Mhm.
when it comes to the ideology of a lot of these spaces, right? The anger can turn into that hatred for women in that way. So when it comes to this kind of date,
Yeah.
this kind of situation, what are your initial thoughts? Why do you think this happened? And why and how do you not let that get to you when it comes to dating other women later on down the road?
Um like I said before, I think it's because I am using dating apps.
Mm,
I think that because I'm on dating apps and that's where all my dates come from, I think I've been on one date that wasn't from a dating app, and she was shocked that it was a date afterwards, even though I used the word date when asking her out. But for some reason, she didn't think it was a date. That was awkward. But yeah,
well, uh, I guess going back then, what would you say? And
yeah,
I'm not saying change is
yeah.
the end all be all, but in your mind, what would you have to change in your situation in the world to feel hopeful about dating, to feel like you will be able to find somebody?
Um, I think having a bigger, better social group, having like opportunities where I'm able to meet women in person without having to go through the apps and just like, and that's this thing I keep seeing that like your chances on the apps are way worse than if you're meeting them in person, but that's
Mm.
not exactly easy, especially when you can't read social cues that well.
Right. Right.
At least on the apps, you know everyone is there, what they're looking for. That's very clear and upfront and easy to tell.
Right.
In person, you can't just like have a tag that says looking for long term relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm happy though, Q, that you said that you enjoy giving advice of your own
Hmm.
on some of these platforms and these pages. I think that it helps because you've been through what a lot of men are going through. And I guess
Yeah.
my question there is if a younger, like let's say a 19-year-old man reached out to you feeling hopeless about dating, let's say he's autistic as well, what would you tell him? What do you think would actually help?
Find some hobbies and keep doing them. If you go out with a woman, try and stay friends with her afterwards, even if she's not interested in a relationship. And don't let your like despair overwhelm you. And that's not easy. And keep contact with your male friends as much as you can, even if you have feel uncomfortable reaching out to them. And one thing that did surprise me fairly recently is like I reached out to people I haven't talked to in years and years, and they were more than willing to hang out with me again.
Right?
Yeah,
It's I know I hate to say it's putting yourself out there, but it really it when you
yeah,
focus on the positives and the goods in
yeah.
life, I think it benefits you so much more than we believe.
Like I think part of the thing when people say putting themselves out there, they don't go into the specifics of what that means and how
Right.
that's helpful. And I think
Right.
that needs to we need to be more like, all right, try and have more friends, more female friends, keep in touch with them, plan events, don't wait to get asked out to events, that type of
Right.
thing.
And what great advice that you just gave
Yeah.
that theoretical, that hypothetical 19-year-old boy. Do you
Yeah.
believe that advice yourself if someone were to tell you that right now?
I would, it would be, I think I believe it intellectually, emotionally, it'd be difficult.
I
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand that. Well, Q, I know this conversation was it's an intense one. I know this
Yeah.
topic definitely isn't light. And I know I reached out to you on Reddit about this. Can you tell me a little bit about why you chose to come on this podcast today? Like why are you passionate and what are you passionate about communicating to us, to the world through this podcast?
I know there are a lot of people because I've met them both online and in person who are like me, who are good people, who are just sort of like typed in with these radical extreme incel groups and who almost feel like they have nowhere else to go. And I know that I'm lucky and I've met people who have been much less lucky about this type of stuff.
Talk to me
And
about that a bit. Like what kind of people?
like there's some people online I've met who are really struggling with who are good people who are really struggling with this. I don't want to say too much about them, but
Understood.
yeah,
I guess then to kind of round out the
yeah.
conversation, Q, what do you, as someone in the midst of battling, but seemingly trying to remove that sentiment and that pain, right?
Mhm.
What do you want listeners to know about you? Male loneliness epidemic aside, what does it feel like to be in this position and how do you make your way out for any man who's listening right now who may feel exactly what you're feeling?
I don't necessarily know how to make my way out if I'm even doing that at this point. Right now, I'm just trying to, get through it one day at a time and try and be a bit better. And one thing that, at least in my opinion, has really helped me is thinking about it in terms of smaller, achievable goals rather than long term aspirations.
Right.
And just breaking it down and trying to think about what I can do.
Right. What's in your control?
Yeah. And it's difficult. If anyone tells you it's easy, they're lying. And yeah.
I always end my podcast queue with if there were one story you could put in the headlines right now, front page news tomorrow, what would it be?
Huh, that's difficult. Probably just talking about how we're setting up a lot of people to fail, especially autistic people, and not just in dating. We're setting them up to fail in their careers. We're setting them up to fail with our current administration treating autistic people like a plague that needs to be cured. We're setting it up to where we don't support people and we just sort of like brush them under the rug. And I do think that a lot of people in the incel community are autistic. And unless we change how we approach autistic people, especially autistic men, as something that's, either you're a socially inept asexual genius or you're a dangerous lunatic, which seems to be like the two extremes. Unless we stop treating autistic people like that, then we're going to keep having these problems. And I know for a fact that it's not just incel ideology that autistic people are getting radicalized by. The Every single extreme ideology recruits from autistic groups. And a lot of times it's people with mental disabilities who end up being suicide bombers or terrorists or what have you. And I think that if we don't address that, it's just going to get worse because autistic people are not going anywhere.
That was beautifully said, Q. You actually touched on something that was so much more profound than
Yeah.
I could imagine. I think, do you feel like there is an administration wide, at least in our country, solution? What is a way forward from somebody who is autistic, from somebody who is battling and has battled loneliness? What is the way forward from someone who knows this intimately?
I don't think there's any one solution. I am going to say one thing. I have used vocational rehab in my state to help with my job search, and that has greatly helped. That needs more funding. That needs more funding nationwide. And I think that one of the big things is going to be making sure that young autistic men can have not just jobs, but careers, because so many of us are either unemployed or underemployed. It's insane. I think that it is a money thing to some extent, because when people are angry and lonely, they get extreme.
Well, Q, thank you so much for joining me. I know I've took up a full hour of your time, but I very
No
much
problem.
appreciate you shedding a light on this.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.